Welcome back. So in the next section, I'd like to talk about receiving feedback. So there are certain things I would suggest that are worth considering and keeping in mind. One is express appreciation. Thank the person for giving feedback. One of the realities is that for many of us, it is harder to give critical feedback than it is to receive it. And so it is likely that the person giving feedback, particularly if it's done in any thoughtful kind of way, done with much thought and perhaps some angst, you should meet on the turf of the person providing the feedback, or if there is the opportunity for a neutral setting. The third message is listen, listen, listen. Do not respond. Do not respond right away. You do not need to defend yourself. This person isn't by and far asking for a defense. You're not in court. You're not being charged with a capital crime. Listen to what the person says. Ask clarifying questions. Ask for more specificity for what they're saying to you, but try hard to avoid being defensive. Use I messages in responding and be very aware of your nonverbal behavior, because that will send a clear message, whether you intend it or not, to the person providing you feedback, that you're defensive or that you're angry or that you're indifferent. Be aware of how you present. As I mentioned before, I also, no matter what level you are within an organization, seek feedback from those who you work. Identify the things you'd like to change and ask people to provide you some feedback along the way. If you have received feedback from a superior, from a supervisor, ask colleagues who you trust to be honest and open with you, to reflect on it, and to what extent that it is consistent with what they see and inconsistent. And someone who says, the guy's crazy, I have no idea what he's talking about, is trying to be supportive of you, but is not being very helpful. And don't assume that in a feedback situation, there's a right and a wrong. Rarely is there ever a right and a wrong. It is often different perspectives, different approaches. That isn't to say there aren't things that can be improved on. Often, and usually there are, but it's not dichotomized in that kind of way. Avoid defensiveness. And feedback is constructive when the person receiving it seeks clarification, where there's some motivation to use it, where there's you give the person a tool as well as an opportunity to use the information that you provide and then follow up with them. So in the case, for example, of John, where if you can provide feedback in the context of teamwork and get to the point of looking at strategies that might be more effective in teamwork, then to follow up a week, 2, 3 weeks later to see how it has been going in terms of applying these tools. You also need to assess whether the person receiving feedback is really ready to listen. I have been in many situations where after a very brief period of time, I get a sense that the person is upset with me. And it's usually non-verbally, and it's usually, when I get this sense, my inclination is to say, you know what I'd like to do is I'd like to stop at this point, and I'd like to set up a time in a week or two and just ask you to think about this and talk with people and see to what extent this might fit or not. No. Go on. Keep going. I want to hear more of what you have to say. Well, you have just told me nonverbally you don't want to hear more of what I have to say. So I'm not going to be sucked into that. And I'm going to say, I hear that, but the timing for me right now isn't good. So let's now set up a time for next week and we can continue this conversation. A person will be defensive when they feel vulnerable emotionally, when they feel that their performance can't be improved, or if they're upset with you as the person providing that information. Probably worth sorting out which they are. If people aren't ready for feedback, then neither a guided experience or verbal feedback will help. And when people don't know what to do, they fall back on what they know. So at the point in time, and bringing someone to that point in time is critically important. At that point in time, when they can hear feedback, then it is instruction. Then it is to say, well, let's look at 2 or 3 options of ways that you could approach this situation the next time it arises. So how do we learn from experience? Experience is most valuable when you have the tools to watch what you do. It's what I was referring to earlier is conscious competence. It is metacognition. So it's thinking about what you're doing while you're doing it. It is, as one of my mentors said, having one eye externally on what you're doing and one eye turned inward into yourself, watching your performance and thinking about it. Thinking about development is a good first step, but you need to take action to support it going forward. So I'd like now for you to think about another situation. You're in a public health department and a person on your staff comes to you and says, I need to speak to you about my supervisor. And that person's supervisor is someone who reports to you. I have to tell you that Henry has been extremely arrogant and demeaning. And it happens to a lot of people, not just to me. But I will tell you, he has no qualms to publicly humiliate me. He has no qualms to call me names. And I have to tell you, I find this intolerable. What would you do? How would you respond? How would you approach this situation? Would you call Henry in immediately? Would you collect more data? What would you say to Henry if you decide to provide him feedback? Where would you do it? How much time would you allocate? Where would you position yourself and him? Think about this in relation to all of what we've been talking about. Finally, I would just conclude by saying that all feedback is worth listening to. Only some of it is worth acting on. Listen carefully to feedback and provide careful feedback. Act on what you think will be beneficial for yourself, for your colleagues, for the task at hand, and for the unit in which you work. Thank you very much.